The inside of the hotel was dark and almost damp from the cold, wet fog. The windows all had their curtains drawn, but that didn't hide the fact the windows all had a long red, green, or black streaks growing well beyond the borders of the curtains. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and every third light or so flickered more than it shone. Maintenance of the hotel looks like it hasn't been a priority for a very long time. The yellow wallpaper was starting to peel, revealing the old gray concrete underneath. Built from the days of the fort, looks like it was a lot less of a conversion than it was a covering. Whether this was useful or simply interesting, Red Prince filed it away as she followed the hallway to the distant sign marked reception. The reception area was much of the same as everything else. Peeling wallpaper, long streaks from the windows. The chairs were leather and they looked like they were comfortable a few years ago. But now the legs were brittle, the leather was practically moldy, and it looked like the chairs would collapse at any moment. The desk itself had an old-fashioned sign in book with a red leather on the cover. The bell was bronze and faded with decades of fingers having dented, discolored, and dinged up the bell. When Red pressed it, trying to get the attention of the receptionist, but instead of a clack of the bell, there was nothing. There was no clacker in the bell.
Is there anyone there?
Red Prince called out, expecting her voice to echo through the halls of the hotel. Instead, her words felt dead to her own ears, like the hotel was swallowing her words.
Who called for me?
She called out again. Her words fell on non-existent ears. Glancing over the sign-in book, she skimmed over the last few entries. Until about a month ago, most people signed in for a few days and then left. But starting a month ago, it got less and less common for any guests to come. Then 2 weeks ago, there would be people who would sign in, but they would never sign out. The last person to sign in was only 2 days before. Making a note of the person's name, Red heard someone walking towards her. Turning to face them, she saw someone approaching in a red and gold uniform, wearing a large red, almost gnome-like hat. Her name tag was Manager Crystal Campbell, a short white woman in her 50s who had a tired face and even tireder eyes. Welcome to the Outpost Hotel. Sorry about the wait. We've been a bit short-handed in these unprecedented times, she said in a tired voice until she saw Red's face and her face lit up. Oh, you're the detective. That's wonderful news. I'm Crystal Carla Campbell, the manager and owner of the Outpost Hotel. As you've probably read in the letter, we've had many strange things happen, but it's gotten worse from when I sent the letter out to you in River City.
Worse? In what way?
Well, for one thing, we more or less lost all contact with the outside world. Phones, radio, internet, satellite, all down. We only get the ferry here once every week or so. So pretty much all of the staff and guests have left now, except for me. So we're very close to closing these doors down for good. Plus, the weather won't change. The Outpost Hotel is primarily powered by wave dynamos and solar panels. However, solar hasn't exactly been reliable lately, and we've been having issues with the wave dynamos. So power failures have been happening often. But I have a cottage set out for you. Some of the hotel's rooms are actually small cottages meant to be enjoyed by the guests. You'll be in one of our best cottages. Red nodded and raised a hand.
That sounds wonderful, but I have a quick question for you, please.
Oh, what is your question?
Does the black moon howl?
I don't know. Does it? Crystal responded while Red shook her head and let out a sigh.
Only beneath her cowl. It's a simple test to see if you're human or something else. But you passed. So let's see this cottage.
Red said, following closely behind while Crystal led the way through the dark hallways. The dark, dank concrete made Red Prince feel like she was being watched. She kept her hand against the wall, helping guide herself through the darkness. An old trick for getting through dark places was to keep your hand to your right until you needed to put your left on the wall. Running her fingers on the right wall, she felt an instinctive wince flow through herself. Kind of like expecting there to be a step in the dark and you miss it. Not quite sure where it came from. It was an almost Pavlovian response. Like something in the Outpost Hotel was familiar, and it was driving her to flinch, like something was attacking her. Still, though, nothing happened. There was just the quiet of the hotel and the shuffle of Crystal's feet. The door outside led to a brick path that was cold and foggy as anything else on the island. Red Prince couldn't see much beyond the path, and Crystal just ahead of her. She could hear the scrambling of the rocks just beyond, but she still felt that tingle in her mind. There was danger beyond, and she could feel herself tense, expecting something to occur. But nothing ever did. The vermin didn't scramble closer, and Crystal led Red to a small cottage. It sat on a dock directly over the water, a lantern besides the door keeping it lit, and oddly enough, there was a semicircle of white sand just in front of the door, making a sealed half circle around the doorway. Here, Crystal turned to Red to speak. Here is where we depart. This key here should open all of the doors in the hotel, and I will probably be in the manager's office. If the phone is working inside, just press 1 to get to me. Crystal held out a brass key to Red, who took the key, running her thumbnail across the ridges of the key. That feeling of familiarity returned as she turned to speak to Crystal once again, only to realize that she had vanished.
Well, time to get inside,
Red said to both herself and her hidden sister. The Red Prince left her shoes just inside the sandy half circle, but she was careful to leave her shoes outside the room. Creatures like the Duppy and the Succulent had backwards feet, and if they saw shoes, they were usually unable to enter the house because they spent all their time trying to put the shoes on that would never fit. Inside the cottage, the lights came on, and the room looked like any other hotel room that Red Prince had seen before. A large bed, a television across from the bed, a door that would lead to the bathroom, and another door that would lead to a closet. It was larger than most other hotel rooms, but Red was certain the luxury here mostly came from the services offered by the hotel rather than the room itself. Very few people in her experience go out to a place with a hotel to stay in the hotel room the entire time. Setting her briefcase down on the bed, she opened her pocket and dumped out her big sister.
Coming out,
Red Prince said, while she got busy with her grimoire and sitting on the bed while she filled out what she did figure out about the Outpost Hotel. The island is definitely under some kind of enchantment. Meteorological anomalies of this nature don't endure indefinitely unless there was magic involved. Even mad science required a power source and a very large, very obvious machine creating the weather anomaly. The only thing large enough to hold something like that was the lighthouse, and it wasn't generating enough noise for that to be the case. Then there was the fact the manager was very clearly lying to the Red Prince. Fallen Grace was flying around the room, opening drawers, trying to find something interesting. This only brought a mildly annoyed grunt from Red Prince while she was compiling what she learned and the questions she still had. Crystal Carol Campbell said she was the only one on the island for months. Yet the sign-out book showed that only 2 days ago someone had signed in. There was no way one person could be managing a hotel all by themselves, even if there were no guests. The lighthouse was on and still going, and those typically had to have a keeper keeping it going. She mentioned wave dynamos, which were a sensitive technology that required human intervention just to keep functioning. So, the likeliest explanation was that there were other people in the Outpost Hotel that the Red Prince wasn't supposed to meet. So, where would they be? Glancing over at the map of the Outpost Hotel on the back of the door, Red made marks where they would most likely be hiding. The lighthouse was central on Outpost Isle and would need someone to keep it running. If there was no one running it, there may be clues on what is happening on the isle. In her experience, most magical threats enjoyed being in a tower or in a dungeon because it was where they felt the most comfortable. The next likeliest place to find information was the library. Libraries, in addition to being places of learning, oftentimes were also places of sanctuary and were used to store not just information, but also secrets and sometimes people. This was true in the exoteric world, and in the esoteric world, libraries were for all intents and purposes temples. Magical artifacts, books, charms, and enchantments were often kept inside of libraries. And any decent librarian would also be one of the last of the staff to leave their duty. Then there were the Martello Towers around the edge of the island. If you wanted to affect the hotel without hiding within the hotel, the Martello Towers were a natural place to start. They were sheltered, away from the hotel enough people were unlikely to stumble across you, but also close enough that you could reach the hotel in any weather fairly quickly. But then there was the final place, the underground tunnels of the isle itself. They were not listed on the map, but Red knew an underground location, likely hidden behind locked doors, in a place people were never going to seek out unless they were searching something out. But oftentimes these places were also the last refuge. When everything else failed, people would hide underground hoping to survive long enough for help. But underground places were also dangerous without esoteric threats. With esoteric threats, there was a reason it was last on Red's list. Do you want to play cards? Fallen Grace asked, flying by, holding a deck of pontoon cards while Red waved her away.
I'm busy,
Red said, while looking over her notes, trying to see if she was missing anything. Fallen Grace responded by sticking her tongue out at her and sitting down right next to Red, ripping the cardboard box open. Wait, something's wrong, Fallen Grace said, showing Red the card box. Sure enough, inside of the card box, a lot of cards were missing. At first, Red was going to dismiss this. The pontoon cards kept in hotel rooms were often missing a card or two. Except, as Fallen Grace dumped the cards out on the bed, a card fell on Red Prince's lap. The card that landed was an ace of spades, landing upside down so the tip of the spade pointed towards Red. Picking up the card and about to give it back to her sister, she saw that something was written on the back of the card. Getting a closer look at it and reading the very small lettering, Red Prince saw that there was something written there. The more she read it, the more she felt it pertained to the case.
What's seen can be unseen. What's hidden can be found. Hear what's not here, and discover who seeks to hide underground. A prison that was never made to imprison, where the living are tombed. What lies with swords is truth. What buries the swords brings your doom. MGP.
What does any of that mean? Fallen Grace asked her younger sister, who read the lines to herself a few more times, before Red quickly flipped through all the cards remaining. Sadly, no other notes were found, but what Red did notice was that none of the other cards were spade. All of the missing cards were spades.
I don't understand all of it, but the structure feels like it's a witch's riddle. The first half of the line is a contradiction or oxymoron. The second half is an action. Where you can find the contradiction in a way that makes sense, you're supposed to be able to do the action. We have to figure out what they all mean, and I feel like it'll all mean something. One thing I know for certain.
Red Prince flicked the card where the spade was, causing the card to move slightly in her grip.
Another term for the spade in a pontoon deck is a sword. It represents a weapon. So what lies with the swords is the truth. That means the other spade carry some vital information. But what buries the swords brings your doom. Likely means whoever is hiding them is dangerous.
Falling Grace sat on the bed, scratching her head, a bit confused by the statement, but she shrugged. Okay, but how do you know this is a real thing? For all you know, someone planted that there to throw you off the path, Falling Grace pointed out.
Well, I don't. All I know is that I have proof that the manager was lying, and I have no proof that the card is lying.
Flipping the card into her grimoire, Red made her decision. The first place she was going to investigate was the library. A prison that was never meant to imprison. Now she just had to find where the living were tombed. It took a lot longer to find the library than she expected. Even with Fallen Grace staying with the cottage, promising not to get caught, it still took so much time. The map didn't account for heavy fog, and more than once she entered the wrong door in the hotel until she finally made her way to the library. The library was crowded with shelves and books. The lights here took time to warm up, but they brightened and made it feel safe. Well, safer. Even in a place like this, Red Prince felt at home in the library. It was where she could get away from her grandmother, and it was where she could find answers to all of the questions in the world. And it was here it could be quiet while the rest of the world was screaming. Still, looking over the circulation and the books themselves, she couldn't find anything. There was no evidence anyone had been here recently. A thin layer of dust covered everything from the books to the computers. The circulation desk didn't hide anyone, and nothing stood out to the Red Prince as particularly magical nor esoteric. There was no restricted section, no history section, and nothing that screamed esoteric or occult to her. After giving all the books a long sweep, Red thought about it for a moment. Where would she hide a note that only she would find and no one else would throw out nor likely to check out? After thinking it over, she had her answer. Heading to the reference desk, she lifted the big atlas of the world and flipped through the pages. Sure enough, in the pages of the atlas was another spade card. Removing it from the pages of the book, she flipped it to the front. This one was a 2 of spades, the deuces, and checking the back of the card, Red Prince was able to find something that she thought would be helpful.
The darkness seeks out the light. The photograph fades before it forms. A hearth has no heart. It spreads from where the hungry swarm. The black moon screams with no voice here. The cause isn't the storm. It watches me with no eyes. Something arcane has been born. MGP.
Red studied the card for a moment, seeing if she missed any lines as she heard something move around the shelves. Sitting quietly, she waited to see if it would reveal itself or if it would keep trying to remain hidden. Sitting quietly, she watched as it revealed itself. An old woman in a tweed jacket and spectacles stared blankly at the Red Prince, not quite comprehending what was happening, but at the same time aware that something was happening. Red stood up and addressed the woman. First, she waved, and the woman remained still.
Are you all right?
Red asked the woman, who still didn't respond, still staring blankly with no comprehension. So the Red Prince decided it was time for the 5-word test.
Does the black moon howl?
This time the woman did respond. She lifted her hands to her ears and she screamed with no words before turning away and running while she screamed.
Well, that's a new one.
Red said as she ran after the woman, hoping to catch up before she disappeared.